Out the sauna window I gaze at the crystal blue lake and dream of the cool waters flowing around my body, contrasting the pleasant heat of the sauna. David Salma.
Hi, this is Julie, and welcome back to the Sauna Trail podcast. Join us in our adventures as we share the story of how our family discovered the world of Finnish sauna. Last week, we used our first wood-burning sauna with a lake to jump into between sauna rounds in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and also saw our first functioning Savu sauna. Go back and listen or watch episode 7 to hear what that was like if you haven't yet. Today's episode is part 2 of a 2-part series. We'll talk about jumping into Lake Superior while using a second sauna on our trip, and also share many of the wonderful gems we discovered in the UP. All 6 of us are here today. How are you guys feeling today?
Good.
Good.
Yeah, it started to warm up, so that's nice.
Yep.
Forest green.
So, Christopher, remind us again how we ended up in the UP and specifically the Keweenaw Peninsula.
So we'd already decided that we really liked this sauna thing and that the Finns were onto something with their practice. And we knew that to better understand it and have the chance to use some really good ones, our best bet was to go where the Finns were, to find where the Finns were. And I'd found this map, which you can see now here on your screen, or if you're listening in the show notes, that shows where people of Finnish descent were most concentrated. And there was the Upper Peninsula of Michigan had a lot of people, and especially this one area, this little peninsula that sticks up in the western side of the Upper Peninsula, called the Keweenaw. Some of the areas there, up to half of the people were Finnish descended. So we figured they must have some good saunas there. And sure enough, on Airbnb, VRBO, the vacation rental sites, there were some good options for sauna. So we looked at several of those and decided to get one on a bay. There were a couple bays on the south and east side of that peninsula that had sandy beaches. And that's kind of a rarity for Lake Superior. I'd only been to the north shore of Lake Superior in Minnesota up to that point, and most of it was rocky shore, at least everywhere I'd ever been. But there was Big Traverse Bay up there and Rabbit Bay, and then a few other places further up from Big Traverse Bay. They had sandy beaches and saunas set right on the shore. So we chose one of those places.
Pretty exciting.
Yeah, so our previous rental was in Manistee, which is like the south central area of the UP. And then we kind of went up to Marquette and Hancock and Houghton, and then ended up in Big Traverse Bay. I think in Marquette we did stop at A Touch of Finland, which was like a small kind of gift shop.
Yeah, gift shop had lots of Finnish stuff there and sauna stuff.
Yeah, so we stopped at that gift shop, and Daddy actually found a couple sauna books that he took pictures of. And then we ate some pasties on the way there. We ate at Tanglewood, which was in Shingleton, Muldoon's in Munising, Lowry's in Marquette, and Amy J's in Hancock. We'll have a comparison of the different ones we ate and reveal the winner of the Pasty-off later in the episode. So then we did finally get to Big Traverse Bay, which was a beautiful sandy beach, and it was unusually warm in the Keweenaw. It hadn't snowed, even though it was early November, and most of the shops were actually closed for the season. There wasn't really anybody there, no tourists. It was pretty empty. It was quite nice.
So once we got to Big Traverse Bay, of course, one of the first things we do is go check out the sauna. And so I think we did sauna that first evening. And just like our previous sauna last episode, I wanted to start all of the sauna fires. But this one was trickier and brought me more frustration. And I'll talk more about that as we go through the 360s later in the episode. But this sauna was right on the water. Like, how far do you think it was from the actual water?
Well, it wasn't right on the water. It was a
That's
little
true.
ways,
Yeah.
Maybe 100 feet, but it was really easy to get into the water. It was just sand. You just walked out of the sauna and then just, down the sand right into the water.
Yeah, there was nothing between the sauna and the water, like no other buildings or, our rental was on the shore line. It had a changing room, and then just like the sauna in Manistee, I wanted to start all the sauna fires. So I did. And this sauna was a little bit more drafty. And it also, I think they had a small child because the stove had wooden guardrails around the stove. And there was one rail right in front of the stove door. So when I went to go open the stove door to load it up, there was this guardrail right in the middle of it. So I had to load up the stove around this guardrail. But the tricky part too was in front of the stove was also the bench. So I was sitting on the bench trying to reach down to load the stove. And at one point, I was on my stomach on the bench trying to get the kindling in there and the paper in there, and I'm trying to light it, and I'm just so frustrated and I can't get this thing lit right. And I didn't really swear, but I felt like swearing a lot. And like I said, it was drafty. I think I remember that. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I think it was a sauna kit, probably from the 90s or the early 2000s. And it was drafty in there. When it was windy, you could feel just a little bit of air. So you didn't have to worry about ventilation in that sauna.
Yeah, that's true. I think I couldn't get it. I think we couldn't heat it above 160 back then. I think if I was to do it now with more experience, I think I would have been able to figure it out and light it so it did get hotter. But like I said, like this was the second sauna that I had lit, and the first sauna was that Nipa stove, which was so easy and just like a piece of cake. And this one was much more frustrating. What do you guys remember about the sauna, the rental, the lake?
I remember that there were a lot of flies. It was like late in the season, but like you said, unseasonably warm. And there were just tons of flies there at the beach, and it wasn't something we were used to.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I do remember I enjoyed the sandy shore so much. That was going in that water from the sauna and just walking along the sand and going in the water it was amazing. I think that was the point where I thought, okay, this could actually be something I enjoy.
Yeah, I remember watching you start the fire, Mama, and I remember watching you. It was frustrating for me to watch you. I wasn't even helping, but I was like, what is this stupid rail doing there? You can't even load it up. So, yeah, that was frustrating for me to watch.
I don't remember you watching me. That's funny.
Was that the place where all the flies were in the window in between the
Screen?
screen? Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
I hated it. I hated all the flies. I don't remember the place, though.
Yeah, and I think they had like bags of water with like coins in them. I don't know if that's some way to attract the flies or
repel them.
yeah.
Yeah. I think there was fly paper too.
Yep. Any other memories?
Was that the place with the boardwalk, too?
Yep, they had a boardwalk.
I remember the boardwalk. I loved that boardwalk.
They had a boardwalk going to the sauna.
Yes, I remember that now. Yep. I have a funny memory because Daniel, you were like 3.5. But I think our first sauna there, it was dusk, so starting to get dark. I didn't have my glasses. I couldn't see super well. So I made some joke about like I just can't see very well, so I need somebody to kind of guide me or whatever. And Daniel, you were so brave and you were like, "Mama, I'll help you see. I'll be your eyes." And so then when we sounded, we did that round, then we were ready to go out into Superior. You were holding my hand and we were running out to the sand. And all of a sudden I just hear you like starting to cry or like whimper. And I'm like, Daniel, what is it? And you go, Mama, I want to go with someone who can see. I want to go with someone who can see. And you were just crying. And I started laughing. And I said, okay, you can go with one of the girls. And so then you went into the water with one of the girls. But you were so scared. It was so funny. You were trying to be so brave. And then the darkness got us both. I also, like Becca, I loved the sandy beach. And we live in Minnesota. It's the land of 10,000 lakes, but we were never outdoorsy family growing up. I was never a lake person. And Lake Superior was, in contrast to Lake Michigan, which is where we were the previous rental, this water was just clear. It was just clean and it was sand all the way out. And we could go pretty far out, really, from the shore and it still be fairly shallow.
Yeah. Big Traverse Bay, you could go out, 30 feet and it's still only a few feet deep. Eventually it would start to get a little bit deeper, but it was super easy to get out there. It was like the cold plunge. It was like my dream cold plunge that I'd been looking for.
Yeah, and the water was cold, but, coming out of that hot sauna, it was so refreshing and so fun. And I never really liked cold water. I remember we would go to California and we would drive by the ocean and Chris would pull over and he would put his trunks on and be like, let's all go out into the water. And of course, I would go along with it, but the water was so cold out in California on the Pacific and I hated it. But this time it was just the cold water was a different feel, a different experience.
Yeah, and then our previous sauna was like really our first sauna as the whole family, but I think the kids only used it a little bit, and I remember it being dark and hard to get in the water. This is the sauna that I really remember thinking this sauna thing is great as a family.
Yeah, and I think this is also the first time we actually washed up in the sauna. So I remember this is the time we brought soap in, and we had the kids, I want to say maybe the second round, we had them wash up with soap in the sauna and then rinse off in the sauna and then go jump in the water.
Because sauna is traditionally, that's one of its main purposes, was the Finnish bath. You can think of it like a shower or a bathtub. It was their way to clean off as a individually or more often than not, like as a family or as a village.
Yep. And I think I remember you were saying something about this time up in the Keweenaw, you felt like it was really sauna country.
Yeah, because we'd see Finnish names on the road signs. And as we were driving along, we started a new game called Sauna or Shed. So as we would drive by a house or a piece of property, there'd be a small building, and we'd try and figure out whether it's a sauna or a shed. Do you guys remember that game?
I think we still play that every once in a while.
I remember that game. I really liked it.
Yeah.
And how did you determine if it was a sauna or a shed?
If it had a chimney, probably a sauna.
Also, like looking at windows and stuff to see, how many windows does it have? If it doesn't have like any windows, it might be a large smoker or something.
Does it have a chair on the front porch?
Or cold plunges.
Yeah, and which way the sauna is facing. Like if it's facing the road, there's less chance of it being a sauna, just because if you're coming out of the sauna, you don't want to be coming out and then everyone on the road can see you.
Or a wood pile
Yeah.
next to it.
Yeah, wood pile's another clue. And, you know, the easiest clue is if it has a sign on it that says sauna.
But that's sometimes hard to see from the road. So you kind of have to make a best guess as we drive by.
Yeah, so there were, you know, we started to see less and less sheds and more saunas and just tons of saunas. You know, we drive along the road and be like, sauna, 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 sauna. And it felt like, oh, yeah, this is the place.
It was incredible. Like, I just couldn't believe, like, if not every house, like every other house, it just felt like so many. Going back to washing up in the sauna, I want to just touch a little bit on the fact that we did sauna as a family nude because that's what Finnish people did. And we bathed, and so that's why the kids were able to wash up with soap because we weren't wearing suits. And Christopher had this crazy idea to take pictures of us running from the sauna to the water. So we took some pictures and we did post it, I think, on our Facebook page, but it was pixelated and it was only to like friends and family. Like, it wasn't public.
It is pictures of our backsides running into Lake Superior.
Yeah. Well, when we came home from that trip, we did get some flack from both of our parents. My dad was very concerned that this picture might get out and that somebody would accuse us of abusing our children. And I think Christopher's parents were just generally uncomfortable with nakedness, and they were just concerned about how this might affect the kids as they get older. So it was interesting to see the difference between how our parents felt about it and what we had read about it in Finnish books, cultural books, sauna books about being nude in the sauna. So I think, like, for Finnish people, culturally, sauna, I've heard it being compared to like a church. Like, there's a sacredness to it where it's the same as being in church. And there's nothing sexual about it. There's nothing lewd about it. It's bathing. It's time to be with community. It's time to relax, get clean, get ready for the week, or clean up from the week. And so one thing that I wanted to kind of talk about with my girls and as a family too is, like, I think sometimes there's shame associated with nudity and fear versus what I read about in the Finnish books where it's just matter of fact. It's nothing, it's no big deal. And women were comfortable in their skin. That was really a piece for me to be like, oh, there are women in this world who are comfortable in their own skin and they're not constantly worried about what they look like. And that beauty comes from within and knowing that our worth is as God's children. And so I know that our parents meant well with their concerns, but I think there was a piece of that nakedness for us that was, I didn't want it to be associated with shame. I wanted it to be that we are a family. These are our bodies. We were created in His image and God's image, and it's nothing to be embarrassed about. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't walk around naked. I do like wearing clothes. And so it's not like I'm all about being nude now, but I think there is something about being comfortable with who you are and knowing where our beauty and worth comes from.
Yeah, and it's not just women. It's the same as, you know, a similar thing could be said for men as well. You know, and in our society, it's like either I look like a Greek goddess and then I'm just comfortable going around in a Speedo, or I just want to be covered up all the time, you know. And then also nakedness is seen as very sexual. You know, there'll be toothpaste ads that have some sort of bikini model selling toothpaste, you know.
Right.
So skin is sexual in the American mindset. Whereas I think the Finnish conception is more healthy, where you're less uptight about yourself. You realize the sauna isn't like some sort of show where you show off like how amazing you are. So it's more about like getting over yourself. The focus is actually less about being naked than the kind of the American conception is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember a story that you told me that you had either read about it or heard about it somewhere where like all these women would go and they would sauna and they would be nude. They would sauna nude together and have a jolly good time. And then the next day they might be going to like some church function or something. And one of the ladies might have a button that's not, her shirt may not be buttoned all the way up or something. And it's very scandalous, so it's funny to see like, I don't know, to see that contrast of like, here you have, you're just completely naked. And then the next day you're clothed, but you're not clothed enough. And it's just scandalous. So I thought that was a pretty funny story. And then it's a little bit of a spoiler alert, but we did connect with some Finnish Americans shortly after this trip and talked with a few of them. Like, how did you do sauna with your families growing up? And one of the things that we heard was that right around when the kids turned 8 or 9, they would stop sauning as a family nude. Then they would start wearing swimming suits. Or if they were doing nude, it would be girls and boys, men, female separated. And so after this trip, Becca was 9. So we decided, well, maybe she's at the age now where we do need to wear suits. So after this trip, the only time we were nude was if it was split, girls and boys, or if it was just Christopher and I, then we would go nude. And that's kind of what we did after this trip. Mostly just out of advice that we got from those Finnish families. Well, that's my soapbox about nakedness and nudity in the sauna. But so we're going to go back to our UP trip now. And one of the other things that we discovered was a fish fry. So we went to a fish fry in, was it Mohawk? Just north of, it was White House Lodging, but they had a restaurant across the street, and we went to a fish fry there. That was my first fish fry ever. Do you guys remember that at all?
I do remember it. It was interesting. I had no idea what a fish fry was, and I enjoyed eating the food.
We sought out several pasties because it was the land of pasties, but also with so much of the lake around that area, I wanted to seek out some fish fries, and there actually weren't that many that were easy to find. So we went to that one. It was pretty good. I don't think it knocked my socks off.
Yeah, I've learned that I'm a sucker for fried fish. So I don't remember what my standards were back then, but I really liked it. Then another night we drove into town from Big Traverse Bay. We drove into Houghton and had pizza at Ambassadors, which was a recommendation from Christopher's former coworker, Sue. So that kind of wraps up kind of that part of our trip for us, for the sauna part. And then we're going to show some 360s of the sauna. And when I say 360s, I mean 360-degree photography. Okay, so this is outside, and you can see it is just very fine sand. And then there's the house that we stayed at.
And the boardwalk to the sauna.
And then as we turn, you can see that it really is quite an easy walk right out to the water there. And, like Becca said, it was pretty empty. I don't remember seeing very many people, and I think that's why we were comfortable running out nude that one time.
Yeah, it felt like we had the whole bay to ourselves.
Yeah. So up closer to the sauna, there it says sauna. And there's the boardwalk to the house. And no snow. You see there's no snow on the ground, not anywhere. And it didn't snow the entire time we were there. It was just wonderful.
So this is the changing room. A pretty good sized changing room. You can sit and relax afterwards. You can see some of the draftiness, I think, through the boards.
Oh, yep. And then we'll go into the hot room. So it had 2 benches and a window looking right over the water, which was really quite wonderful. And then you can see there's buckets and a hose for water. And then you can see the stove. It's kind of a hard angle to see, but so the front of the stove faces the bench. So if you can imagine me trying to fill that stove with my inexperience, it was very frustrating. So that is this sauna. What do you guys think about the sauna now that you have used so many? How does this compare?
I like all the water options inside, like having the hose and all the buckets, and the changing room was fairly large.
The top bench looked a little low, but the beach looked nice. I wish we had used it when I remembered it, because it looked like a nice sauna.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to be honest, I don't remember tons about this sauna. I do remember that the view was good from the window. And Daniel mentioned the upper bench being a little bit low. But I don't really remember how the steam was, which makes me wonder how much steam we really made back then. Because now that's something that I would pay closer attention to.
Yep, definitely.
And in fact, a lot of Finns, when they say they took a sauna, at a new sauna, they'll say, how is the steam? So that is an important quality.
So once we left this rental, we took the long way home. We ended up driving all around the Keweenaw Peninsula on our way home. So we left early one morning and took a very long drive home. So another 360 that we took was of a rocky shore along the drive. And I think you said Lewis Point. Is that what it was called?
No. Lewis Point was a place that we went and explored that was right at Big Traverse Bay.
Oh, okay.
So I think before we got to the rocky shore, we went to Estivant Pines.
Yes, we did. We did go to Estivant Pines, and you can see a 360 here of Estivant Pines, and it was a beautiful hike. I don't know how long it took, but we did it all in this one day of driving home. So it was a fairly nice hike, and you can just see some of the plant life that we have there. So there's just the different things. It was beautiful. And like I said, no snow, so there was still green there. Yep.
Yeah, they had lots of interesting fungi at Estivant Pines.
Yeah, definitely.
And then the rocky shore here, let me pull up the 360. That was just past Cobber Harbor, and we got out. And the other side of the peninsula was much less sandy. So if you like a really rocky, wild shore, that side seemed more active. So we got out and took this picture in this area.
Yep. And then there's a few more pictures, just a few random pictures on our trip. So here's one of Christopher, my studly husband, just leaning into a tree, looking up at the sun.
And then this is a video at that tree, just looking down at the water coming in. You can see how clear and clean the water was.
Another thing that we noticed when we were driving around playing sauna or shed was the sheer number of wood piles that we saw everywhere. So this is just one that we saw. We took a quick picture of as we drove by. But, not having used anything wood burning before in my life, I just never have seen anything like this. And then we saw these signs, Waltz crawlers, and I didn't know what they were. And I just kept seeing them like at these random gas stations or something. And I finally asked Christopher, and he was like, oh yeah, hun, it's bait. Again, to show how little I spend outside.
It's either bait or some sort of secretive cult that we don't know anything about.
Everywhere, all over the UP. And then this is a picture of our route home. So Christopher has a gift. One of his many gifts is to turn a 3-hour drive into a 7-hour drive. And this is how he does it, is the road is never direct, and we're always stopping at many points along the way to take back roads, small roads, roads with no lines, gravel roads. It's always an adventure. It's always fun. And we always see interesting things. So you can see we went north and then went south to go home.
Yeah, we saw quite a few things that day, but there was so much more that we could have seen. We knew that we probably wanted to go back up. I think we enjoyed the sauna. We kind of knew we would, but we kind of fell in love with that area of the Upper Peninsula. And I like to call that area the Upper Peninsula. And that Upper Peninsula, the Keweenaw, or as they also call it, Copper Country, it's a little bit different than the North Shore, as I had already mentioned earlier, in that there's hardly any resorts. It's much more out of the way and less touristed. And you can see on our map of our drive, we're pretty close to the coastline most of the time. So I feel like either you can get into Superior pretty easily or see it a lot more than if you're driving north of Duluth. And it also just felt kind of more humble. I think they had quite a bit of economic downturn in the previous years. So it felt just like a real place, not really set up for tourists, which we like that kind of authentic feel.
Yeah, I think if you look on that drive there's quite a few points along there where you can get out and you do have access to the water. You can actually get to the water if you really wanted to. So that was pretty cool. So that kind of wraps up our trip, but we are going to go through and talk about the pasties that we ate. We had 6 of them. And I think one thing that we learned about pasties in general is that they're good. We liked them. They're kind of plain, but I think once we realized what they were, we were able to appreciate them for their simplicity. So we're going to start with the ones that was kind of the lowest rated, and then we'll move our way up.
So probably the one that we liked the least, and I'm not sure we would get this one again, but was from Tanglewood and Shingleton. We got the beef flavor. One thing in its favor was that it was huge. It was gigantic, as you can see from this picture. Not really portable. You couldn't just carry it around. And it was also kind of mushy and falling apart. We felt like maybe it needed a little bit more salt and herbs, but the crust was tasty. We give that one a grade of a C or a C minus. And to be honest, these grades might be a little low. This ranking might be a little low because I don't think we quite totally understood the simplicity of pasties yet. So all of our rankings or gradings, I think, would have gone up at least another notch.
Yeah, so these were notes that we took like shortly after the trip or during the trip. So it's not like we're remembering this now.
And what was the next one?
The next one was Lowry's and Marquette. We felt like it had more of a vegetable flavor. We thought the broccoli tasted weird in it. Might have been some cheese. We weren't sure. Not the most flavorful, but not the least. But the most portable so far. So that was good. The grade was B minus.
Then the next one?
The next one is Grams, which we talked about last episode. We got 2 of them, one with beef and potato, and one with beef, potato, and rutabaga. The potatoes were cut in smaller cubes. It was more tender, more cooked, not overdone. It was portable. The flavor wasn't as good as some of the other ones. The crust was tender and it was nice and soft. We gave this one B or B+.
Yeah, and I remember the texture on that one being kind of nice. And the cubes, the small cubes, really kind of shined.
Yeah, the next one was from Muldoon's in Munising, and that flavor was just beef flavor. This one was the most portable. It had decent flavor. It did have larger chunks. So I think that's what helped it be not too mushy. And the crust was fine, was the notes that we have. So I think we gave that one a grade of same as Hudson's, B, B+.
And then we tried Jack's Fresh Market and Manistee. We got 3 flavors: vegetable, beef and mushroom, beef and potatoes. This had a better flavor compared to some of the other ones. The chunks were also larger than Graham's, but the interior was slightly more mushy than Graham's. And the crust was also fine. I think it was slightly crispier than some of the other ones. So I think that one was like a B+ or an A-.
Yeah, and I do remember the flavor of that one being pretty good at Jack's, especially for a grocery store.
Yeah.
The last one that we tried was Amy J's Pasties in Hancock, and we got a beef pasty and a veggie pasty. We thought that this was definitely the best crust that held together, so it was very portable. It had a slightly unique interior. It was sliced or scalloped fillings versus cubed, which we ended up liking a lot later. We thought it was slightly too big and needed a bit more flavor, and we also thought the beef was more flavorful than the vegetable one. So that one we liked the best. We gave it a grade of A-.
So that Amy J's was the winner of this Pasty-off.
Yeah, and we'll have more pasties on future trips, and it ends up causing quite a contentious divide in our family as far as which is actually the best pasty in the UP.
Yeah, we still can't agree on it.
Well, that should wrap it up for today. Thanks for joining us this week as we recounted our adventures in the Keweenaw Peninsula of the UP. Come back next week to hear about our first barrel sauna experience and a trip to the North Shore. If you haven't yet, join our Locals community and say hi. It's free to sign up. You'll get regular updates from us, and if you'd like to support this podcast, Locals has the option as well. We've created an Upper Peninsula travel guide that you can access on our Locals page. It has sauna recommendations, restaurant recommendations, and activities and sights to see. We've also posted our pasty rankings there. The address is thesaunatrail.locals.com. We appreciate all of our supporters and fellow sauna hounds. Our podcast can be found on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and other streaming platforms, as well as our website, thesaunatrail.com. New episodes release every Saturday, which is the traditional day for sauna, also called Sauna Paiva. We hope to see you on the Sauna Trail.